I'm just going to say it right in the beginning of this video. I'm not happy about this. This whole Uber and Lyft minimum wage saga, if I'd call it that, just took a very interesting turn. And that is, as you can see, minimum pay for Uber and Lyft drivers in Minneapolis, I've covered the story a bunch already, has now been pushed back to July. This is what I was worried about. I was really hoping that on May 1st, we'd be able to see what would happen when Uber and Lyft said, hey, we're going to leave a city if something happens that we don't like. And what would happen? Would they actually leave or not? If they did leave, what would happen? Like, a lot of unknowns, right? And fortunately, getting into it, the showdown in Minneapolis over May 1st level of a minimum pay has been put off for 2 months. Both companies said they would pull out of the city and leave when the minimum compensation ordinance went into effect at the start of next month, or on May 1st. And in addition, news reports said that Uber would also withdraw from the larger Twin Cities area, including the airport, which is not located in either Minneapolis or St. Paul. Causes a lot of issues, right? For, one day having a lot of people being picked up at the airport to then not, right? And this is what I was kind of worried about, is them doing this. Because I feel like this gives Uber and Lyft now a little bit more power, right? Now I want to stress, and I want to make this very important on this video, I might as well say this as we're going through this article, that I don't like to be very pessimistic. I don't like YouTubers that say, oh man, I hate Lyft and Uber, let's talk about it. I like to be very transparent and talk about everything. There's a lot of amazing things Uber and Lyft has done. There's a lot of things I'm not a fan of, and I've talked about that in every video. I don't like to create or spread FUD or fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I just like to be transparent, right? In no way I'm trying to bash Lyft and Uber, but one thing that I will say, is that of course drivers don't get paid the way they should be getting paid. And this is the first big case I've seen maybe ever. I think really the first big case ever in modern day ride-sharing society, I'd call it that, where we get to see what would happen in a typical city if a minimum wage law was passed and Uber and Lyft said they might leave, what would actually happen, right? So the fact that we have to now push this back is annoying, because they did say here that it's pushed back to July 1st. Frey had vetoed the original ordinance but was overridden, and he said that a delay is not a fix. While the council continues to make a mess of this, I'll be working with policymakers and partners from across the disability, hospitality, and business communities to find a path forward for drivers and riders. And this is going to be the nitty-gritty, right, of what the bill is requiring in terms of a minimum mileage pay and minute pay in terms of the time, right? But I just think this is not a good idea. I have to be honest, right? Because according to the Associated Press, Councilmember Robin Wansley, if I pronounced that correctly, who's one of the leaders pushing for the original legislation, said the delay would lead to better outcomes for drivers and riders and lay a stronger foundation for a more equitable ride-hailing industry statewide. And I agree that, he said the current model for Uber and Lyft is extremely exploitative, and that's true, right? In addition, another council member said that the additional 2 months gives other ride-sharing companies more time to, quote-unquote, come in, get set up, and running. And I have said this, that there are different companies looking into this, like, different companies such as Move, My Wheels, Rides, and I don't know if I pronounce it Joyride or I think Joyride. He said that there were 6 others that have expressed interest, right? And so that's huge, that there are a lot of other companies that could come into play, fill the need of Uber and Lyft, and going forward, that I'm going down here, excuse me, give me a second. That later figure is unchanged from the now delayed legislation. So all the kind of stuff that they did have into play about putting in this minimum wage law is still in effect. It's just being delayed. But this worries me a decent amount. Now, I've talked before in a bunch of different videos about this, so I'll sum this up pretty quick. But here's the big thing about this story, which is why I'm so invested. This is maybe the 4th or 5th video I've done about this. And that is because I genuinely believe that Uber and Lyft drivers should get a minimum wage. A minimum law should be in play, in my opinion, federally. Now, granted, I do understand that different cities have different layouts and structures and economics, right? And in New York and California, minimum wage laws got put into place. Not really that much of an issue. However, I do understand those are two different markets, the two biggest ride-sharing hubs in the country, no doubt about that. And, there's probably a lot more happening. In Minneapolis, if there's not as many rides, I could see where this could be a fair debate of, well, could this even work, etc., etc. Here's what bothers me about this, though. And I've said this before, like I said in other videos, where, let's say May 1st rolled around. And let's say Uber and Lyft, they said they were going to leave. Well, one, would they actually? It could be that maybe their bluff gets called and they actually don't leave. And I've showcased some articles about this, that Uber and Lyft are playing a game of chicken and everything, that who knows, maybe on May 1st, they're like, you know what, we're actually not going to leave. Nothing like this has really ever happened. Yes, in 2016, you had a situation in Austin where Uber and Lyft did actually leave. But the problem is that ride-sharing in 2016 to now, two vastly different things. Like, ride-sharing was still super new in 2016. It was very different. So who knows, maybe if May 1st rolled around and this was going to go into effect, maybe Uber and Lyft would say. Maybe they would pull out, tough to say. But in addition, and I think this is a big thing that I'm not going to lie, and this is what I've said before and many times, is it was worth the gamble. Because if, let's say, May 1st rolled around, I think Minneapolis has a better, perspective than Uber and Lyft. Because if, let's say, Uber and Lyft stays, boom, that proves, hey, Uber and Lyft can't use this excuse anymore. There's been numerous times, even in different countries, where Uber and Lyft, let's say something happens, some law or legislation, and Uber and Lyft says, you know what, we're just going to leave. That is their number one defense argument. It's their number one tool in their toolkit. I'm not going to lie, I think it's a bit childish, and there's a whole debate behind this. And so then when it comes to this situation, right, I was hoping that it would happen, where May 1st rolls around. Let's say Uber and Lyft does actually stay, boom. Huge leg up for not only Minneapolis, but every other city looking to make better laws for ride sharing. But then if Uber and Lyft does leave, and those other ride sharing companies take their place, that's even better too, because that shows, hey, we could be fine without Uber and Lyft. And like I said before, they do have a quasi-monopoly over ride sharing, right? I think it's like 70 or 80% of rides taken are done by Uber and Lyft, right? So I'm not happy about this. The reason why, like I said in the beginning, is the fact that this gives Uber and Lyft a little bit more bargaining power. Now, granted, I do think there is some argument to be said that the extra couple months does give other ride-sharing companies time to kind of come into Minneapolis, figure out their logistics and their structures, and maybe do some marketing, whatever it is. So I do think there is an argument to be said about that. But the problem is, I feel like this was done out of more of a desperation of saying, shoot, what would happen if Uber and Lyft did actually leave? And I think the fear of that from Minneapolis' perspective was like, you know what? Let's not gamble it. Let's not risk it. Now, I'm glad that they didn't change the bill. I will say that, I want to point that out on the article. They didn't change the bill. So that's at least good. But they did push it back. And who knows, if, let's say, July 1st rolls around, does that mean they're going to say, hey, you know what? Actually, we're going to push it back till now September 1st, right? Is this going to be this constantly cat and mouse game of it gets close and then, I don't know, right? But at the end of the day, and I've said this before in other videos, and I'll say it again, I do think when, say, hopefully July 1st happens, that they stick to their guns. Because I think it is important to see how this plays out for the future of ride sharing, and especially for the future of drivers getting paid what they need to be getting paid. It has been proven, in numerous different studies. The biggest one reviewing over 1 billion rides with Uber and Lyft, 1 billion with a B, that Uber and Lyft can be fine when a minimum wage law can happen. Of course, will Uber and Lyft maybe have to make less money or pay less money? Yes, to their shareholders. That's really what it comes down to. Uber and Lyft financially would be okay with this, right? They just don't want to spend the money, right? And I know that this is a tricky situation, right? Because Uber and Lyft, some of their, board members and CEOs and whatnot, or spokespeople have come out and said, look, Uber and Lyft are businesses. The government should not be involved with the pricing of ride sharing. And to an extent, I kind of get what you're saying. Look, the government should do government stuff. We're going to do our business because that's what we do best. You do government stuff and the politics, which is what you do best. And I do get that almost separation to an extent. But at this point, in this day and age, there does become a point of basically treating your independent contractors unfairly. And that's been a huge issue with ride sharing over the years. It's gotten significantly worse and more prevalent that just drivers are not being treated the way they should be being treated. And don't get me wrong. Like I said earlier, like there have been a lot of amazing things about Uber and Lyft, in terms of creating jobs, allowing people to have flexible schedules, allowing people to make extra side cash. They can, Uber and Lyft is truly the best secondary job to fit in with a busy schedule. There's a lot of benefits to what ride sharing has done, right? I mean, in Minneapolis, for example, in that given area, there's about 10,000, give or take, rideshare drivers. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of jobs that would be unfortunately gone if Uber and Lyft did pull out, right? So there's a lot of amazing things that Uber and Lyft has done, but I think one thing that's gotten trickier is drivers have been treated worse over the years, right? It's one of those kind of unfortunate inevitabilities, and I do think that a minimum wage, although it's not perfect, and although it's not something that would be like mind-blowingly like life-changing for every driver out there, I do think it's at least a start for a decent standard that rideshare drivers need to be getting paid. And I know, like I said, Uber Lyft says to government and legislation and politicians and lawmakers, like, hey, you stay out of our numbers. Like, this is our kind of arena. But if you look at, let's say, what happened here in California, in case you didn't know, and this happens a lot in other cities and states, the law of AB5 or the bill of AB5 got passed, really giving better protection to freelance workers. As you can imagine, especially here in LA, with the movie industry, a lot of people get taken advantage of, regardless of the position. But that's just one, small yet big example. But AB5 across the board said, hey, we got to make things better for freelance workers, independent contractors, etc. There's one job, one profession that was the asterisk on that, the exception, and that was rideshare drivers. So it's weird that Uber and Lyft, as companies, and rideshare drivers as a collective have almost always been the exception to the rule. Uber and Lyft almost always kind of gets to skate away with what happens to every other independent contractor job and position, period, right? I mean, if you think of how big the movie industry is. And somehow, even the movie industry was like, hey, we're at mercy to AB5, we got to do it. And somehow Uber and Lyft was the only companies that was able to make it work, I guess, as a benefit to them, to not have to deal with all this stuff, for lack of a better word, with AB5, right? And so that's a big situation that I think for the future, there definitely needs a lot to be done. I think that ride sharing, I think there's going to be a point, and this is my theory, that we got to hit some type of rock bottom for things to then go back up. Now, are we there now? Maybe this is the worst things are ever going to get for drivers, and things will eventually get better. When I first started driving in 2015, 2016, or actually, let me take that back. I signed up, I remember at the end of 2014, started driving in the beginning of 2015. Those are like the glory days of driving for Lyft and Uber. I was actually just talking about this with an Uber driver who I had a couple of days ago, and he's like, I actually started driving when you started driving. It was awesome, right? Now, things are not the case. So maybe this is the inevitable rock bottom right now that has to happen in order for drivers to get paid what they should and rightfully deserve. Especially with the fact that most of them use your own car. They're taking that hit of depreciation and paying for gas, with gas getting more expensive. They're taking, of course, the hit when it comes to taxes, and now they deal with the fact that you are an independent contractor. Insurance being an issue, both not only auto insurance, but then also rideshare insurance, which you should have, and then health insurance, which typically you have to pay out of pocket. If you're a full-time driver, this list goes on and on. And so bring it back to this. Why is this all relevant? The main relevancy is this. At the end of the day, drivers need to be getting paid better. And in 95% of places, they don't get any type of protection, which is why protection needs to exist. A good pay needs to exist. All these things need to exist. And this case has been a big landmark one that a lot of places around America and maybe even the world are looking at. I know it sounds like a bit of an exaggeration, but I don't think it is, because this is huge. And it will be used, I think, as a landmark case in the future to show, hey, what would happen if a city did put in a minimum wage law? But not only that, because this has already happened in California and New York, but they did it with Uber and Lyft aggressively fighting back. What would happen if Uber and Lyft did leave an area in modern-day ride-sharing society? What would happen if, let's say, Uber and Lyft got their bluff called and turns out that they were kind of just saying that the whole time they actually stayed? what would happen with other ride-sharing companies? What would an area look like if no Uber and Lyft existed, but other ride-sharing companies existed? Would things be fine? Would they be okay? Or would it actually just crash and burn and we realize, shoot, we actually do need Lyft and Uber? These are all these unanswered questions that I think at some point, for better or for worse, looking at it like gambling, I think do actually need to be answered. And unfortunately, we won't know the answer to any of those questions now for another 2 months until July 1st officially happens.